I'm Jim Anderson. I was on the pastoral staff at North Covington Church from September of 1967 until September of 1975. You know, poverty was deep around us, and I don't think we ever knew that. And that's, that deep, that sense now of need around us was, I think, what prompted some other things that we did as well. And the pantry, I think that's what we call it, began in that way. It did not begin with searchlights in the night and fireworks and cutting of ribbons. I think I was shopping at a Jewel for the family and had the idea that I'm just going to talk to the manager and see if there's some food available for us. I was taken downstairs and there was box after box of dented cans and other unsaleable merchandise, non-perishable stuff. And I don't know how much I took away, a trunk full, I guess. And I think I got charged 50%, half price for the stuff. And that was hauled it up to a room just off the gym that I think is still called a kitchen. I remember starting to go to, I think it was an Entenmann's bakery on Lawrence, and coming back with bread and pastries and some of those things that were more perishable. And then the government food started coming in too, and we had fairly large supplies of that. But it was that informal. I mean, I don't think you would go back in the annals of the Board of Community Concern and find any decision that said, let's start a pantry. A woman came to the office, and I don't know what her connection was. It could have been through the gym program. And I can't remember her face, but I remember her wearing a long black coat. It was winter time. And she came and just sat down. We started talking, and it was kind of my first real face-to-face, 6 feet away kind of conversation with a single mom in deep poverty. She told me this story about having not gotten a check for 2 months, that I took her up to the pantry and she filled a bag of food with food and walked away. And at least she carried something with her that I guess later on I would have talked of as kind of sacramental. We sort of broke bread together in a way, and I'm sure God was very present in that transaction. And I went away a different kind of person from it, realized that all the stuff that we did really needed to have that human closeness of true hospitality. And so that one incident still remains somewhere in my memory quite alive.
Okay, this would have been the early 80s, and the Friendship Center, called the Pantry at that time, had been in the associate pastor's office for many years. And our associate pastor at the time was Paul Erickson, and he had this cabinet full of canned goods and non-perishables, and people would come to the church office and then wait, because sometimes he'd be gone, making calls or other things. So people tended to pile up in the church office. It was getting to be kind of an issue. The Board of Community Concern, which oversaw all the outreach programs, and I was on the board at that time, started talking about what else could be done, and thought maybe it's time to move it to a spot of its own, but then we'd have to get some volunteers and set up a program. So we talked about it, and then we started talking with the trustees about that. And I can remember being on a group of 3 or 4 people from the 2 boards, just going all over this building, saying, where could we carve out a pantry? We looked at the old print room, which is off the landing between floors. We looked at the garage, but that opened out onto the alley, kind of an isolated spot to have pantry. Tried to see somewhere else, and finally thought, the top of the stairs outside of the gym was an alcove that just had some coat racks. And so that was decided, and the trustees built a wall and brought that cabinet up from Paul's office and got us an old desk, and we were in business. We got some volunteers were open 3 mornings a week. Just had one person each morning at the beginning, and we had some chairs out in the hall. We just got busier and busier, and we had to have 2 volunteers each time. And then so the commodities started becoming available, the cheese, those big blocks of cheese. So then we had to add refrigeration, and, it just kind of went on and on. But it got to the point when I had to stop after a couple of years. I was in seminary, and it looked like it was about a 15-hour week at that point for a director. So getting to be too much for a volunteer. And so then the first paid person was Donna Strang, who was at that time the bookkeeper for the church. And so Donna was approached and said, yeah, I'll do it. It just added her hours, and she was on site anyway. So, and then she did it for a while, and then it went to, I think, Ann Molesky. Yeah. And then after that, Joey. Yeah. So I was there at that transition time.
Well, Ted Helwig, I was on the board for 25 years, beginning in 1997. And all but a couple of years in that stretch, I was chair of, or president of the board, depending on what we called it at that time. So had a long run. It was still part of the Board of Community Concern at that time. We had a part-time director at the time, and she was on the payroll of the church. And then the church made the decision to add, the wonderful new education wing, or whatever we call it, which necessitated the destruction of a couple of 2 flat buildings, one of which was where the pantry was. So the biggest change we went through was needing to find our own space outside of the church. The church, of course, supported it and provided what we, I think, originally called it a rent subsidy. It just caused us to become more resourceful in fundraising and become more serious in trying to develop ways in which to make ourselves sustainable. Because like everything else, over time, costs kept increasing, and we eventually had to leave the first place because the landlord, they weren't that happy with our clients ultimately being on their properties. So then we moved, that was on Kedzie, and then we moved to north of Foster. Then we moved to the place we were at for many, many years on Foster over near Northeastern, where the old White Hen Pantry used to be in the strip mall there. And we were there for many, many years and had a very good working relationship with the landlord there. Then further changes over time involved opening a second location in the Lincoln Square area from actually a group of women, actually young women in that area had decided they wanted to start a food pantry. They came to us just for some advice. What do we need to do? How do you do this sort of thing? That evolved over a year or 2 process where we just decided, why don't you become a part of us? We got an agreement, they met their goals, and so we opened, site number 2 on Lawrence Avenue. But it came with a much bigger rent. It came with a kitchen, an operable kitchen. It had been a restaurant, and that gave us, the ability to dream about starting to try, a hot meal program and that sort of thing. But again, some more financial burdens. For most of the time that I was involved, we always stretched. It was always a stretch to be able to cover our expenses. And so even pre-pandemic, we decided to consolidate the 2 and move it out of the North Park neighborhood for the first time in all the many, many years. And so that Lawrence Street location was more centrally located or easily accessible. Our clients adapted, and I think we're appreciative. Shortly thereafter, we decided we could afford, and logistically operate a hot meal program, so we started that. During the pandemic, as is not surprising, the numbers of clients increased dramatically. The amount of food that the food depository was making available increased correspondingly. But it became a real issue. How are we ever going to be able to maintain in a storage function, enough food to serve the clients. We got a huge grant from Swedish Hospital, the North Shore Hospital System, who wants to be very involved in community health. It allowed us to totally gut and remodel our space, to be able to store more food, to be able to create a better shopping, like grocery store type environment. And actually the Food Depository donated a van to us. So it's a refrigerated van so we can pick up food, deliver food and keep it fresh. And we're trying to expand our in-home delivery service to seniors or disabled people. It's exponentially expanded, in that 25-year. And we're open 5 days a week. And have a pet food pantry now too, once a month on a Saturday, and then have the hot meal program once a week on Thursday evening. So it's really grown, is the bottom line, in 25 years. Community outreach is what a church should be doing. Jesus' teachings in the New Testament is really what it's all about. And that's always been my inclination from my days at North Park College. And once I became much more aware of how complex and needy the world is, to me then, as a church, I think we have to keep involved in things like the food pantry. I hope, people volunteer and see, what you can do. Hopefully that inspires people. I don't know. It was always rewarding because no matter how dark it seemed at times, somehow we got through it. And we're thriving now, so it's great.